Hi everyone, welcome back to my 1973 series. I'm doing a bunch of videos over the course of this year on films that came out in 1973, most of which I have not seen yet. The reason for this is because it was 40 years ago this year, and it was the year I was born, so I'm turning 40 tomorrow, actually. April 4th is my birthday. I am doing a whole bunch of films from that year. The film that I'm doing today, as you can see from the title, is The Devil in Miss Jones, which, if you're not already aware of this, is, in fact, a porno film, a pornographic film from 1973. It was recommended to me by a guy named Matthew. Let me tell you a little bit about Matthew. Matthew is the co-director and star of Love Stalker, which I've talked about a bunch of times. He is also a longtime friend of mine. We've known each other for at least 25 years, perhaps even longer, although I can't even remember back that far. According to him, the first time that we met was at what we call day camp. During the school year, obviously, you go to school. During the summer, you don't. But if a parent wants to keep their kid occupied during the course of summer when there's nothing else to do, they might send him to day camp, which is basically 5 days a week. You go to the park district where you're supervised by people who will give you activities to do, races, chases, games, swimming in the pool, stuff like that. It's not school, but it's a way to get out of the house and keep you occupied for a good portion of the day, for a good portion of the summer. And this apparently is where we met. I don't remember that actually, that part. According to Matthew, he regaled me with a tale of a film that he'd seen recently. We were talking about E.T., so I guess this was 1982, 83, so it would have been 9 or 10 years old. We were talking about how great it was, and he said, "You know what, Scott? I saw E.T. 2. There's a sequel to E.T. It's called E.T. 2. And I was like, "Really?" Very gullible as a little kid. "Really?" And he says, "Yeah, and E.T. gets killed in it." And I went, No, E.T. can't get killed. He's been playing pranks like that on me for off and on since then. Actually, a bunch of years later, during our wilder post-high school years, he had tried to convince me that there was the thing to do these days in New York City was to spin discs at parties. Not in the sense of being a DJ playing, but actually putting a CD on the tip of your finger and spinning it. You go to the party, you have drinks, you talk, but you also spin CDs on your finger the whole while. I was like, no, they don't. It's like, yes, they do. He's very sincere about it. Yeah, they do. They spin discs on their fingers. I'm like, no, they don't. Stop trying to convince me of this, you jerk. But he has been a friend of mine for many, many, many years. And of course, he is a big film fan as well. And so he's introduced me to a lot of stuff that I wouldn't normally check out. Including a lot of Italian zombie movies, you know, from the 60s and what have you, you know, where he's getting ready to do another project in the late 90s that was sort of gore and horror related. You know, he was doing research and recommending all kinds of stuff to me. Recommended a lot of different directors to me to check out different things. And so, you know, he's really kind of expanded my tastes going from high school forward. He introduced me to Evil Dead 2 and Reanimator. He introduced me to Sergio Leone. He introduced me to, you know, a bunch of great stuff. So... Oh, and Kubrick, too, A Clockwork Orange. He was the guy who showed me A Clockwork Orange. Awesome. So, he found out, of course, because he watches my videos on occasion, that I was doing all these films. So he said, "Scott, I'm going to send you a package. I'm going to send you a bunch of movies from 1973 so you can review them." I was like, great, fantastic. It's like, they're a little off the beaten path. I would be very surprised if you've seen any of them, actually. I'm like, no problem. You know, I'd love to. As long as they're from 1973, I'm up for it. And he said to me, you have to review each one. I don't mean just toss them all off in one video, just briefly mention what you thought of them. I mean do a video on each one. So I was like, and he's like, you can't skip any either. You have to do them all. I'm just like, what is he sending me? More of these cruddy Italian, you know, zombie movies with the bad dubbing, what have you? Well, as you can see, one of the first movies that he sent me 5 movies basically, and one of them was The Devil and Miss Jones, which, you know, is, of course, a film with hardcore sex scenes in it. Now, I did a little research before watching the movie. Again, I used Wikipedia, basically, just to find out a little bit about the history of the project. I didn't really read about the story. I didn't necessarily think there was a story, you know. But apparently, this is a film that got a lot of respect when it came out. Movie critics that reviewed mainstream films were also reviewing porno films because apparently they were just that good. The Devil, Miss Jones apparently belongs to what is known as the golden age of porn in the 70s, which includes films like Behind the Green Door and, of course, Deep Throat. These are the most famous porno films ever made. But it does contain, of course, hardcore sex scenes, and that's not something that I normally look at. I realized that when I was going to be watching this movie, I'd have to talk a little bit more about myself personally in order to set the context, specifically why it is that I don't watch pornography. And that is simply because it doesn't really do anything for me. I prefer acting. I prefer people convincingly pretending that they are enjoying themselves during, a sex scene, rather than actually looking at a big close-up of genitals. I would much prefer to actually feel it and do it rather than just watch it. It's just not my thing. It doesn't matter how good-looking the girls are, or how big their breasts are, or whatever. It's not my thing. But a promise is a promise. I watched it anyway, and luckily it's only a little over an hour long. I don't think it's even an hour and 50 minutes long. Mercifully short. So I got that over and done with, and so now I'm going to talk about it a little bit. So, the title, of course, is a play on The Devil and Miss Jones, which is a film from the 1940s, but the plot doesn't have anything to do with it. You have a woman in the beginning who's played by Georgina Spelvin, who is a veteran of a number of these types of films. She basically is alone in her apartment. She slits her wrists in the bath and dies, and then winds up in this sort of limbo where she is told that she has a very, very clean file. No big offenses. However, you did kill yourself, and that means you can't get into heaven. They won't accept that. She's just like, geez, I wish I'd done more. I would not mean hurt anyone, but I wish I'd just, indulge my lust a little bit more. Actually, I'm a virgin, never had sex before. Do you think maybe you could give me a little bit more time before I proceed on to the next stage, just so I can sort of work up a few credits towards hell, just so I can sort of enjoy the pleasures of the sins and what have you, so I can sort of earn my place there. And the guy tells her, well, if I did, it wouldn't be for very long, just for a short while. He says, oh, I just want to know what it's like. So he's like, okay, fine. But when it's time to go, it's time to go. She's like, that's fine. So then she meets a character, a really creepy looking guy with a good 70s porn mustache called the teacher, who then tells her things to do and then does things to her, and they do a lot of things together, and then she ends up doing things with other men, 2 at a time perhaps, and other women, and then, spending some nice alone time in the bath, what have you. And then finally, the clerk says to her, well, it's time to go. She's like, really, can I have a little more time? Do you think maybe I could go back? He's like, nope, that's it, I told you only have a little more time. It's like, I'm a little worried, hell doesn't sound very pleasant. I'm pretty worried about how painful it's going to be. He's like, painful? Oh, no, that's just a myth. There's no fire, there's no prolonged torture for eternity, anything like that. It does last an eternity, of course, but it isn't as unpleasant as you might think it'd be. It's like, really? Well, okay, I guess we better get on with it then. So, in the last scene, she ends up in a small, dingy little room with a man who won't have sex with her. She's like, please, please, please. And he just ignores her. He talks about the flies and how he needs to pretend to be asleep to fool the flies. And he won't have sex with her. And this is her eternity. So, there you go. That's the film. Like I said, I don't really find watching hardcore sex scenes pleasant. Whether they're professionally done or amateur, whether or not they're, done with a lot of style, or technical quality. And that's one thing that was noted, is that the technical quality of this film is very high, considering what type of film it is. But it's still, just not my thing. Just not my thing. Like I said, I'd rather be doing it. I'd rather be feeling it rather than just looking at it. Because, it just doesn't do as much for me. There's been a number of sexual scenes in mainstream films that I've really found, exciting. I'm not going to go into too much about what those are and why, but just in terms of acting, not just in terms of the quality of the production and how good looking the actors are, but just in terms of, how convincing is the performance. Obviously, because they're pretending, and I find that somewhat reassuring that they're pretending, rather than thinking about how they're actually, what kind of negotiation they would have to do to actually have sex. I don't know if you've heard of the novel Blue Movie which I believe is by Terry Southern, co-writer of Dr. Strangelove. But it was about a mainstream and very successful director who decides that he's going to cast major actors and actresses in a film with hardcore sex scenes in it, and what happens when that takes place. So yeah, I read that book a long time ago. I figured that Gwyneth Paltrow would be perfect for the female lead. Yeah, I haven't made a habit of watching actual porn. I did, however, on a couple of occasions, watch something called the AVN Awards. They aired them on Showtime in the early part of the year. That is the Adult Video News Awards, and it's basically like the Oscars for adult features. And there's this whole, I know a little bit about some of these people, like Tori Black and Jenna Jameson and Sasha Grey, but obviously don't watch their stuff, but it was really weird watching this show. You know, they're all just like acting really like lascivious and wearing really, really provocative outfits, but it was basically like an alternate version of any other award show, which you've got all these stars, you know, and all these directors, and they give interviews and they accept prizes on stage, and there's film clips and everything like that. But I'd never heard of any of these people, unlike the Oscars, so that I know all the films. Here I knew none of them, which was kind of strange. It was like, you know, like an alternate version of Hollywood, which is basically what the adult industry is. Anyway, that is what I have to say on that film. Can't say I enjoyed it, but I managed to get through it without being too... I don't even want to talk about some of the things that I saw in this particular movie. Let me put it this way, the anus is not exactly my favorite body part, okay? And they spend a lot of time on it in this film, so glad I got that over and done with. Thanks very much for watching, guys. My next two films that I'm going to be reviewing are going to be Papillon with Steve McQueen and Dustin Hoffman, and the Clint Eastwood Western High Plains Drifter, which, if I'm not mistaken, was recently reviewed on the Collab channel I'm on. Thanks very much for watching. Appreciate it. Thank you for enduring this with me. Take it easy.